Alright folks, so if you're looking to level up your gimbal skills, then here are some useful gimbal tips that I use myself within my workflow. So let's take a look at 6 gimbal tips that you should know if you want to use a Gimbal Like a Pro. So here we go. Alright, so as I said, we are talking gimbal tips in this video and got 6 for you coming up. This is 5. We got 6 gimbal tips coming up in this video. So the first one is balancing and adjusting your settings. Always make sure that you have your gimbal properly balanced and that you have adjusted the settings so that it will match what you're shooting. So what I mean by that is balancing the gimbal is not always enough. Adjusting the settings can be just as important. Because if you're shooting a wedding or real estate, you really want your gimbal to react really slowly. But of course, if you're shooting sports, then you probably want your gimbal to react a bit faster. But it always depends on what kind of mood you're looking for within your film. But what you don't want is some sudden movement within your shots. So adjusting these settings to your needs will improve the performance of the gimbal. But if you don't know where to start, I've made a PDF with my custom settings that you can download. I also have an extended version that comes with the Gimbal Academy, but you can buy that one as well. But those two are linked in the description. So the second tip is know what frame rate and shutter speed you are shooting in. So I still see this question come back again and again, and it goes something like this. Hey Pete, I've balanced the gimbal correctly, but my footage still looks jittery. What do I do? So this is more for the camera basic stuff. And make sure that you know what frame rate you're shooting in and that you match that to the shutter speed. And what I mean by that is that no matter if you're shooting in 24, 60 or 120 FPS, make sure that the shutter speed is set to double the frame rate. So if you're shooting in 24 FPS, you want your shutter speed at 1/48 or 1/50. And if your camera has shutter angle, use that and set it to 180 degrees. Then you'll never have to worry about your shutter speed being wrong again. If you take a look at this clip here, it is shot in 60 FPS, but with a shutter speed of 1/50th and not 1/120th. It looks okay when you play it back normally, but as soon as I slow the footage down on a 24 frames timeline, it looks jittery. And that is because the shutter speed don't match the frame rate. So play around with some of those settings and make sure you have this right before you hit record. You can also make custom modes within your camera so that it's easy to change between the frame rates. Number 3 on my list is keep your gimbal setup light. So when you're first starting out, you might not have that much camera gear, but you still want to look like the pros with a big and hefty setup. So what you do is that you add accessories, microphones, monitors, frames, wireless systems. All this gets added to the gimbal so you now look super cool. But trust me, I've been there and it doesn't do you any good. All it does is that you tear on your body and especially on your back, and you won't be able to shoot for that long of a period at the time. So keep it simple and keep it light. That will help you in the long run. And for the most part, I only add a monitor and the side grip to my gimbal. The side grip is for added control, and the monitor gives me a larger screen so that I can easily adjust it when changing positions when I shoot with the gimbal. But if I don't need the monitor, I won't put it on there. And when it comes to microphones, I really never use it on my gimbal. If you mount a mic on top of your camera, it will make your setup top heavy, and in most cases impossible to balance. And it will put unnecessary force on your motors, so if you really need it, try to mount it somewhere else on the gimbal or use a smaller lavalier instead. Alright, number 4 on my list is don't shoot everything on a gimbal. Just because you have a gimbal, it doesn't mean that you have to shoot everything on this thing. And that is why I have two camera setups, one for handheld shots and one for my gimbal and my glide cam. And yesterday I was on a shoot where we shot most of it handheld, but there were some shots that I found the gimbal more useful, and that was where I used the gimbals to create those shots. So use the gimbal as a tool for your filmmaking that will help you get creative and more smooth shots when you need it. But remember, if you don't need it, don't use it. Alright, number 5 on my list is pretty important, and that is, once you get on a shoot, make sure that you watch your footage back if you're shooting on a gimbal. I've seen this before and I've done it myself, is that I balance the gimbal before I go to a client, and once I get out there, I take the camera, I put it on there, and everything should be fine. But it has been on transport, so what you do is that you balance your gimbal, you auto-tune it, and then do a test shoot. And then watch the footage back to see if there's something wrong, if the gimbal is straight, there's no jitter or anything within the gimbal. If there are, try to rebalance it. You can also auto-tune it again. Just make sure that once you get to the shoot and you're ready to shoot, the gimbal is up and running and working perfectly. So watch your footage back, then you know that it looks good once you're shooting. And then the last one here, this tip number 6, is that learn to use the proper gimbal techniques. There are so many times I see that people don't use correct gimbal technique, and that will eventually lead to bad looking footage because you aren't probably walking correctly, or you're using the wrong kind of shoes, too much bent over, and all these things will either destroy yourself or get bad looking footage. So make sure that you learn how to walk, you learn how to do the gimbal moves and all that before you start shooting, and then keep it simple. Do the easiest move first. Don't try to do all these creative moves once you get started. So start with the simple ones and you'll get good within no time. And if you haven't seen my video from last week, I encourage you to go back and watch that. I have 5 basic gimbal moves in there that are pretty easy to pull off once you know how to do it. So if you're a beginner, go back and watch that video, it's pretty good. And then lastly, just want to mention that the Gimbal Academy is up and running. I'm currently creating more videos for the Academy, and if you're interested in that, the link is down in the description. Sign up for it. There's a lot of great tutorials in there, and I will be thrilled to teach you everything I know about working with gimbals. Alright folks, that is it. I don't have any more for you. Hope that you find these gimbal tips useful, and of course, if this is the first time you're here, remember to subscribe if you want to learn more about filmmaking with motion. And lastly, stay creative and stay safe, and if you can, go out and shoot some dope videos. See you next time. Bye.